Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So October was some month on the legal front. It started with some good news stories like Omarosa kicking Donald Trump's butt in court, like Congress announcing that it would actually enforce its own subpoenas. But then the month finished with stories like Chief Judge Beryl Howell criticizing DOJ's handling of the insurrection cases, and Steve Bannon, after being referred by Congress for prosecution, Steve Bannon remaining uncharged, footloose, fancy-free, and a continued threat to our democracy. So friends, we have miles to go on the justice front. But we'll get there, together. Here's a short recap of the legal stories for the month that was October 2021. So two more defendants, two more insurrectionists were just sentenced to relatively short prison terms. I don't think we the people are prepared to accept anything less than full accountability, anything less than justice. Because justice matters. So Omarosa Manigault Newman kicked Donald Trump's butt. Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. So the battle for justice continues. And friends, justice is a team sport. We all need to get in the game. Here's a short recap of the legal stories for the month that was September 2021. Let's talk about why. Criminal contempt is back in play. If guys like Steve Bannon, Mark Meadows, or other Donald Trump lackeys refuse to comply with subpoenas from the House Select Committee investigating the attack on the Capitol, let's talk about why criminal contempt is back in play. Because justice matters. So let's talk for a minute about the precedent the Department of Justice would set if it failed to prosecute Donald Trump for the many crimes he inarguably committed. And spoiler alert, the precedent ain't good, and it ain't just. And justice matters. So let's talk about the never-ending conspiracies of Donald Trump. Today, spotlight on Steve Bannon. Because justice matters. So let's talk about two related stories. First, the Senate Judiciary Committee just released a report revealing more Donald Trump election crimes. And then the second story, let's talk about today's contempt of Congress by Steve Bannon, Mark Meadows, and others. And let's tackle what Congress should do specifically with Steve Bannon. And I've got three words to offer. Lock him up. Three more words. Because justice matters. Let's tackle what Congress should do specifically with Steve Bannon. So doesn't it seem like back in the day, witnesses were often getting hauled before Congress and invoking their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, pleading the Fifth. It's not happening much these days. Why? Well, because Congress isn't really hauling people in front of the committees to testify. The witnesses have been ignoring congressional subpoenas, and Congress seems unable or unwilling to enforce those subpoenas. But friends, I feel like that's about to change with the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th insurrection. So let's talk about what happens when witnesses actually do appear before Congress. It's coming. And those witnesses invoke their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Let's talk about what happens when they plead the Fifth. Because justice matters. So Donald Trump held another one of his hate rallies, this one in Iowa. He whipped up the crowd with false claims of election fraud and a stolen presidency. Let's talk about the implications for the 2022 midterms if the Department of Justice fails to enforce our nation's laws. Because justice matters. So when it comes to the topic of Donald Trump and accountability, it's usually pretty easy to find bad news. But I actually think there's some good news that has flown under the radar screen a bit in recent days, and it comes from something that President Biden said about Donald Trump. Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. So, did you see what Representative Adam Schiff said Congress will do? Not may do, not might do. What Congress will do if witnesses fail to appear for testimony this week. Let's talk about what Congressman Schiff promised the American people Congress will do. Because justice matters. Subpoena deadlines for testimony this week. I have what may be a novel suggestion for Congress about how it can enforce its subpoenas. Let's talk about what I would call the legal belt and suspenders approach, because Congress really needs to both put on and hold up its big boy justice pants. Because justice matters. So, some good news. Donald Trump's criminal associate, Steve Bannon, is well on his way to a prosecution for criminal contempt of Congress. Let's talk about what should happen next. Because justice matters. So let's talk about why Steve Bannon, now that he's been referred for criminal prosecution, will not be able to run out the clock the way Don McGahn did. And that's a good thing, because justice matters. Let's talk about three numbers: 194, 70, and 1. Steve Bannon's criminal contempt of Congress by the numbers, the justice numbers. Because justice matters. So let's try to find the lighter side today of this, Donald Trump hellscape that we've all been living in, because Donald Trump has been ordered by a New York State court judge to sit for a deposition this Monday and testify truthfully. What could possibly go wrong? Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. So let's talk for just a few minutes about the late Colin Powell, first black Secretary of State, weapons of mass destruction, helping Barack Obama get elected, and saying in recent years, and I quote, "Donald Trump is a liar who skirts the Constitution," close quote. Let's take just a few minutes to talk about the complicated life and legacy of Colin Powell. Because justice matters. So Donald Trump has filed yet another lawsuit, this one against the House Select Committee investigating the insurrection, its chairman, Benny Thompson, and the National Archives. Why? Because Donald Trump doesn't want anybody to see the evidence, the incriminating evidence of what he did when he orchestrated and incited the insurrection. Let's talk about why his lawsuit will fail. Because justice matters. So Steve Bannon is about to become the target of a grand jury investigation. And Donald Trump is about to become a subject of the very same grand jury investigation. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. So, how many Republicans do we think will aid and abet Steve Bannon's crime by voting not to refer him for criminal prosecution? Let's talk about that, because justice matters. So we are now waiting for the full House vote on Steve Bannon, whether the House of Representatives will vote to hold him in contempt for refusing to comply with a congressional subpoena and refer him for criminal prosecution. The House Select Committee has already voted unanimously, Republicans and Democrats alike. They held him in contempt and they referred the vote to the full House floor. So let's talk about the disastrous consequences for our democracy if Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice ultimately refuse to prosecute Donald Trump and his criminal associates for their crimes. Because recognizing that the rule of law is our last best shot, like justice, matters. Day 4 of the Steve Bannon indictment watch. Let's count down the days together, because justice matters. So there's some new blockbuster reporting from Rolling Stone magazine. It looks like Donald Trump, in organizing and inciting the insurrection, he got by with little help from his friends in Congress. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. So let's talk about this new ruling by the Wisconsin judge presiding over the Kyle Rittenhouse murder case. The judge ruled that the prosecutors cannot refer to the 2 people Rittenhouse killed and the one he shot who survived, cannot refer to those people as victims. But the judge also ruled that Rittenhouse's defense attorneys can refer to those human beings as rioters, looters, and arsonists. Let's talk about that, because treating everyone in a case fairly, victims and defendant alike, like justice, matters. So let's talk about the Alec Baldwin shooting incident on that movie set in New Mexico. The Santa Fe County District Attorney just announced that she will not take off the table the possibility of criminal charges. So let's discuss the legal principles that will now come into play in trying to determine if anybody has criminal liability for that shooting that left 1 dead and another wounded. Because justice matters. So I feel like Chief Judge Beryl Howell just vented for us all, gave voice to our frustration over how the insurrection cases are being handled by the Department of Justice. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. So Steve Bannon has not yet been indicted by the Department of Justice for the crime he committed, contempt of Congress. How are other witnesses now behaving? Let's talk about that, because Congress retaining its status as a co-equal branch of government, like justice, matters. So documents are starting to come to light, like an email written by Trump team lawyer John Eastman, you know, the guy who drafted the 6-point memo, the blueprint for the coup. And more documents are going to start coming to light from the National Archives and elsewhere. And I have a feeling some of these documents are going to feel like mini Nixon tapes. Let's talk about that, because justice matters.